This one's an absolute stonker of a comparison. I've been waiting for ages to compare the Special 40 and the Amphion Argon 3S back to back over a period of time. So I'm very familiar with the Special 40 and I'm very familiar with the 3S. I stopped listening to the 3S around 3 months ago because it went into the system that's behind me, and that doesn't really get listened to that often. So I pulled them out about a week ago, and we've carried on listening to them just to get them moving and get them back up to room temperature alongside a set of Special 40s. So specs wise, I'll put them down the screen, but basically we've got 86 dB 6 ohm Dynaudio Special 40s, and we've got 87 dB 8 ohm Amphion Argon 3S's, so they'll be slightly easier to drive. A lot of people say Dynaudio speakers are hard to drive. They're not that hard to drive, they just like to be driven hard. If you've got something at home, Class D, Class AB, 50 watts to 100 watts, you're not going to have a hard time with a Special 40. It'll still play well, but it will still play well with a kilowatt behind it, you know. So yeah, cost wise, 2.8 for the Special 40. They've gone from 2.5 to 2.7 to 2.8 over about 5 or 6 years. The 3S is £2,200 or it's £2,350 if you go for its sort of custom grill sets and things like that. So there's a deficit of £600, but I like to categorise speakers in a sort of 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, 2 to 3, you know, as it is. And these sit in that £2,000 to £3,000 bracket, which is expensive for stand mounts. It's the top of what most of us will go to for a stand mount, and most people in the world won't ever even look at a speaker that costs that much. So, you know, they are a relatively expensive bunch of stand mount speakers. We've got 2 systems running. I'm going to do 3 tracks with one system on each set of speakers, 3 tracks with another on the other system. System 1 is the Rose RA180 integrated amplifier and the iFi Neo Stream, Shoreline interconnects and Epic X speaker cable, both from Chord. On the right is the Hegel P30A and H30A reference preamp power amplifier, and the Auralic Altair G2.1 connected again with Chord Shoreline, but this time balanced, so XLR connections between the streamer and the preamp and the power amp. And we've got Chord Epic X speaker cable again coming from the power amp. So I wanted 2 systems because I wanted to see how the speakers level up in terms of kit. One system is about £6,500, the other one is about £35,000, maybe slightly more. I want to see, you know, if one set of speakers puts a stellar performance in with an entry system and the other one doesn't get going until a very expensive system, then that needs to be commented on, you know. My estimates, of course, I can't go into this blind because I've heard both speakers a lot of times. I expect a more detailed performance from the S3s, so from the Amphion speakers, and I expect a more bass present attacking performance from the Special 40s. We've got a rear ported design in the Special 40. The binding posts are a standard, sort of, they're quite a posh binding post, but they are real nice and tight on the banana plugs, but a standard sort of fit banana plug. And I'll say that in comparison because the other speaker, the Argon 3S, has a more pro audio approach to its binding post. Strange looking things, never seen them on any other speakers. Still take banana in the center of them, but they'll still take spades and bare wires, and that goes for both speakers. Where they differ is the passive radiator that the 3S uses over a port. So that should make them simpler to put places. Now, as a fan of speakers and a big fan of phase and keeping things quite linear, a passive for me should technically be a little more unruly, but we'll find out as we go on. I'm going to try and keep this relatively brief. I've got 4 pages to get through, and you know I like to focus on the details. 3 tracks, Down with the Sickness. You may all know that track. If you don't, then I'll link to the playlist below. I've also recorded sound bites of each speaker doing each track with System 2. So whilst you won't get the best in terms of audio from the video, you should get the same comparisons when we're talking the differences between a set of speakers. So, you know, have a listen to that. I've listed that in a different video because I don't want to get copyright strikes for this video. Not necessarily because we monetize our video and YouTube pays us, because it doesn't pay us a lot. But what it does do is it causes copyright strikes, which limits the amount that our videos go out to people that I want to see them, that will decide to come here and buy the speakers and systems and CI systems and TVs that we deal with, you know? So that's why I don't want copyright strikes on my videos. That video will get copyright strikes like crazy, but it'll be an unlisted video with a link below. If you're watching on a TV and you can't do that, have a look on your phone, see if you can get it on there. If you can't and you're struggling and you do want to see it, just drop me an email, info@studioincar.co.uk, and I'll just send you the link to the video and you can watch it how you see fit. Alright, let's get into it. Sound wise, I've done the 3 S's on System 1 first, and I'll go through it in track order. There's only 3 tracks. Down with the Sickness, it's a rock track, alright, it's quite heavy, metal-y sort of track, but it sounds glorious, a lovely thing. Rock solid center image, excellent layering, very easy to read instrument separation, okay? So they are throwing up a large stage and it's easy for me to pick stuff out. Very easy, you know? Easy seems like a cop-out word when you're explaining sound, but I find the less complex a speaker is to listen to, the better the speaker is. A speaker should make an easy job, even of complex material. The more space there is around there, the more your brain's just going to get on with understanding that that is an actual sound rather than a speaker playing that sound, you know? Great bass attack, plenty of low end, but can get a little bit complicated. In this instance, I'm just talking about bass. So you've got an extra 3 hertz between these two. One's sort of got 41, one starts at 41 hertz, the other one's 38 hertz, I think. So, you know, on paper, the 3S should be the lower playing speaker, but everything down at those sort of lower registers can get a little bit unruly, and the further up the volume level you go, the more unruly it gets. PYT, so my favourite Michael Jackson tracks is a disco track, so pretty young thing. Loads going on, there's tons going on in this track, as there is in any Michael Jackson track. If you haven't seen, I don't know what video it is, I don't know what channel it is, but there's a mastering engineer out there who dissects Michael Jackson tracks, and he may have been part of putting them together in the first place. But there's tons of information in MJ tracks. They're not just these cheesy pop tracks that people think they are, you know. Usually mastered really well, and the vocal and leading instruments are usually all at the same level and very sort of clinically done. It's nice. With PYT, with the Argon 3S's, I've put slightly reserved mid-range, alright? I know that track, I know it really well, and his vocal isn't reserved. It is up there with all of the, you know, it's up there with the bass, it's up there with everything. It shouldn't be held back. I was surprised by that, because the performance of these speakers outside of that track doesn't air that characteristic, you know. Everything else has more pop, okay? So all of the other parts of that track, they all have their sort of characteristic freshness to them, apart from his vocal, his sort of recessed vocal. I've put large stage presence, okay? So that is a key feature of Amphion Argon speakers, all right? All the way from the 0 to the 7LS, they will throw up a huge stage with a mental sweet spot, okay? You can cartwheel across this couch and you won't be outside of its sweet spot. That is a key feature of the 3S's. On to the Special 40 with System 1, same track, same order, so down with the Sickness. I've put fast, okay? Its transient response it is just quicker than the 3S. Less bass depth overall, but more control, okay? So when I was saying about some slightly complicated bass with the 3S's, the Dynaudio doesn't suffer that. Okay, it might not play as low, but that low stuff that isn't there isn't complicated. It isn't messing anything up. It's just fast, articulate, typical Dynaudio mid-bass driver style bass. It's got full control of it. The snare drum in that track immediately stood out with the Special 40. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to listen to it, but yeah, it just immediately threw itself forward, which means the mid-range presence is just more attacking. It's more on you, you know, it's more forward in its sort of presence within the stage. There's less air to the Special 40 than there is to the 3S. They're a slightly more closed off sound than the 3S. The 3S throws up a wide but relatively shallow stage. It's just in their characteristic to do that. The Special 40 throws up a more spherical stage, sacrificing a slight amount of width over the 3S's, but much more depth, much more front to back, you know, almost sort of palpable stage. MJ's vocal on PYT was absolutely where it should be, you know, fantastic performance. It made the 3S's seem flat. That's not a compliment. In comparison, it was a flat performance on PYT from the 3S's, where it was textbook on the Special 40, and that goes from top to bottom. The bass was better, higher frequency was better, the vocal was there, the presence, the depth of the stage, it was all just, yeah, it was all just better from the Special 40. Weekend in Paradise, the comparison between the two, I missed it off the 3S's. The comparison between the two, on the 3S's, I've got loads of width, lovely vocal detail, just the right side of harshness. That track is a harsh sounding, emotive track. It needs that crispness and harshness to it to convey that sort of emotion. It's not a good sounding track, it's just a track that I love, but it has a certain grit to it that the 3S's just, they absolutely nailed it. They were better than the Special 40 at playing that track. The Special 40, in comparison, they polished the track, they cleaned it up for you, they gave you their opinion of how it should sound. It just took that, well, it didn't take the shine off, it added shine. It took the aggression off and it added a bit of luster that it just that track doesn't want for, you know. It wants to be edgy and not recorded super cleanly, and it wants to be like that, you know. You can hear it. I did write in the Special 40 notes that it's still an absolute pleasure to listen to and that the vocal performance was fantastic. Alright, so don't forget, this is comparatively speaking, this isn't just a review of the Special 40, so I'm talking in comparison. The 3S's did such a good job of keeping that sort of raw aggression in the track, they just outshone the Special 40 on that track. Then we switched the kit up, alright, so we changed from the RA180 and the Neo Stream, the i-Fi Neo Stream, over to the H30A and P30A Hegel reference pre and power amp, an Auralic Altair G2.1 streaming. I was using Lightning DS. On this system I was using Tidal Connect. On this system I'm using Lightning DS with Tidal embedded, so it just pulls it down as does Tidal Connect. So the same track, the same file, everything, just a different system. I didn't change the Special 40 off the stands, I kept them on there because I wanted the direct comparison between the two systems for my own, you know, selfish, greedy reasons. But yeah, so I kept the Special 40s on the stands and then I brought the 3S's in afterwards. With the Special 40 in place and the beginning of Down With The Sickness, I out loud said, "F*** me." I couldn't believe the difference in that track, okay? The vocal, the snare was just amazing, the 8th notes on the bell section of the ride, it was just, it was so good. And so sort of lifelike. The change was dramatic in the performance between comparatively priced kit to, you know, high-end priced kit. So yeah, just they leveled up, like they really did, and that's what I was hoping for. I didn't want a similar sound from two largely differing costs in kit, you know. I've written down that there's a wider centre image than the 3S's. Now, you know, of course this is the first time they've been played with the other system. The 3S's I'm still comparing to System 1, okay? So I've put wider stage now. That is something I found overall, even with System 1. Remember I was saying about the 3S's having a tight centre image but a large sweet spot? That's been the same regardless. That is a speaker characteristic. The Special 40 has a wider centre image and a narrower overall stage. And then I've written louder please, okay? So the Special 40 with the Hegel combo would just play for days. PYT, smoother than the RA180 and gorgeous vocal performance, alright? So their performance in replaying MJ's vocal from PYT, banging. It's just absolutely knocking. I loved it. So yeah, you know, leveled up again. Background detail far more obvious. Now, you know what I was saying earlier about maybe watching some of the deconstruction mastering of Michael Jackson's stuff. A lot of that weirdness that goes on in the back of his tracks, a lot of the odd stuff, just become much more present, much more forward in that stage. So that's all there. Tighter bass impact again. All right, so the bass got just tightened up even more. Okay, and the synth halfway through PYT, the detail in the start-stop nature of the synth was just really good. You know, leveled up, just good stuff. Weekend in Paradise, acoustic guitar realism on another level. Okay, that guitar's the best it sounded all day. Yeah, it just was, and the harshness came back. Okay, now previously with that track, the Special 40s polished off that track. It didn't, not with the Hegel stuff. All right, it just, you know, that grittiness and edginess and the emotive sort of rasp to that track, it was all there. The guitar just sounded much more lifelike than it did with either set of speakers on any of the previous listening sessions. So yeah, two complete standouts and a shifting characteristic with the speaker. So that's the speaker bend in itself around the new kit. You know, I wrote also it was similar to the 3S's performance with the Rose stuff, just turned up. So it was effectively the same performance on steroids. Yeah, so I was really happy with how the 3S's dealt with that track through the Rose equipment. The Dynaudio's kind of have grabbed that character back with the Hegel stuff, and it just sounds far better, comparatively speaking. Now those two systems stand alone with those two separate sets of speakers. You wouldn't really put the two in comparison. One is far more expensive than the other and therefore should perform far better. The Amphion Argon 3S's with System 2, okay, first track, Down with the Sickness again. Wider with more air, smaller center image but less location specific, large sweet spot, really nice layering and more zing than the Special 40. Okay, remember I was talking about that bell on the ride. The realism from the Special 40 was quite special. What the S3 did is it seemed to add a little something to it. It made the ride sound like it was a slightly smaller ride. It was a little bit more zingy, a little bit more sort of a little bit more ring to it. I don't think it was a good or bad thing. That is just a sideways step on how that bell is replayed, you know. PYT, much better vocal presence than previous. I was expecting a flat performance. Well, colour me corrected, alright. The performance with PYT with the Hegel combo and the 3S's was completely different to what it was with the Rose stuff. Something about the synergy between that speaker and that amplifier and that track, because the other tracks it played amazingly, but that track just made these speakers sound flat in comparison. Like maybe I had an adverse reaction to how recessed his mid-range was, but the Dynaudios really did mug them off in that circumstance, you know. But in this scenario, they came on leaps and bounds. His vocal presence was back, everything was on the leading edge. We've still got that typical Amphion Argon, slightly shallower but much wider, much more expansive stage. But yeah, they really did come up well with that track this time around. Weekend in Paradise, lovely high frequency performance on the guitar, albeit the tambourine was smaller with the 3S as it was with the Dynaudios. It's not recorded very well, remember, but it is still there, and it was just, you could kind of pluck it out the air a little bit more with the Special 40s than you could with the 3S's, which again is quite surprising considering the HF performance of the 3S's has kind of picked the Dynaudios, you know, at each gate post, you know. Wide centre image, different to the previous system, alright? So this track had a wider centre image than it did on the previous system, so you know, that might be again the synergy between the speakers and the system, which is why I wanted to change the systems to see if they leveled up, to see if it changed any sonic characteristics of the speakers. So some top drawer findings there between the two. I've got my notes now on the comparison, you know, between the two outside of those tracks and what I find interesting between the two. Closer than I thought it would be. Some of the characteristics of what I went into the comparison thinking they would be. You know, they've come out right, but some oddball ones not liking certain tracks. And you know, I thought for a minute that the Amphion Argon 3S couldn't disco. If you can't disco, mate, you get out, you know, but they can. Special 40's more fussy, alright? That surprised me. It's not really a fussy speaker, but don't forget we're talking about a comparison here with a speaker in the 3S that is actually really easy to position. That sweet spot's massive. I swear I could have just turned the speakers around and I still would have been inside their sweet spot, you know? They make the Special 40 look tricky to position. They're not really. 60 centimetres, I think, 50, 60 centimetres away from any wall will be alright. The smaller your room gets, the more lively they'll get down at the bottom, the Special 40. Whereas the 3S, they're not really like that. I've had both of these speakers at home as well. So the 3S does throw up less sort of blow as you get them closer to the wall. So yeah, just bear that in mind. You'll want to pull the Special 40s out slightly, whereas the 3Ss will play slightly nicer closer to the wall. The Amphion's more two-dimensional in its stage. It throws up a wider stage, but it's a little bit more two-dimensional. Okay, I've discussed that plenty of times throughout this. The Special 40 and most Dynaudio speakers throw up a three-dimensional, if not spherical, type stage. You know, that works really well. The Amphion's better at low levels than the Special 40. Okay, so if you're a sub 50% on your amplifier type of guy with normal gain, you know, some people have got massive gains, 50% is just way too loud, whatever, then they're probably the speaker for you. Treat the 3Ss like you would a loudness button. They have certain extremes that make themselves more obvious at lower listening levels, so it sounds a lot more realistic down low. The Special 40, it wants you to sort of lean on the volume. It's a bit more of a party animal. So I think out and out the 3S performs better than the Special 40 does at a low volume. It's more realistic to my home listening, really. I don't ever just absolutely lean on it at home because I have neighbours, I have kids, whereas in here nobody can really tell us what to do, so we're constantly leaning on speakers, you know, so two different scenarios. Another thing that surprised me was the Amphion Argon 3Ss. They look like a battleship. They look like you could chuck them off your roof and nothing would happen to them, which, you know, subconsciously leads you to believe that they're just an aggressive, out and out, bold, could deal with whatever you can throw at them sort of performer. They're not like that. They're much more delicate than meets the eye. Okay, and by delicate I don't mean they're weak and frail and fragile and all the other words that can make them seem like a rubbish speaker. They're just delicate in the way they place things. They play very gently. They just have a delicate placement of high frequencies and instruments and their bass and their mid-range. It's doesn't sound the way that it looks. I love the way they look. I absolutely love how militant they look. They're a hard-looking speaker, aren't they? Yeah. The Special 40 can change level adequately to suit more expensive kit. Out of the two, what changed the most when we added a bunch of kit to them? Probably the Special 40. Alright, meaning that the Special 40 can level up better than the 3S can. 3S, you can keep your kit to 10 grand, you know. The Special 40, you can go to your 30s, 40s, things like that, and the speaker won't really need changing. Obviously, you can put much more expensive speakers on much more expensive kit and get more reward. I'm just saying that they can level up very well, and comparatively speaking, they leveled up better than the 3S's leveled up. Overall, the Dynaudio speaker has a more defined bass. It might sacrifice a little bit of that very low end, but let's remember that very low end leads to a lack of control. Okay, so overall, the bass performance from the Special 40 is much cleaner, more dynamic, and much faster. Okay, it's a much faster presence in the room. So transient wise, it's just a quicker speaker. High frequency wise, air and space belongs to the 3S's. Alright, there is no comparison. It just throws up air and space from the speaker far further than that of the Special 40. If I was to characterize the two, the Special 40 is a bit more mulled wine and the 3S is a bit more Chardonnay. There's just a little bit more bitterness to its high frequency, a little bit more pizzazz. Both are incredible performers. They're two great speakers for two different blokes. Alright, I would say that I have both of these characteristics, but I'm fortunate enough to have two different locations. Okay, if I had my own listening room at home that was separated from the house, like I used to before we got a salon, then I would be a Special 40 guy. I listen louder. And by listening louder, it doesn't mean I listen loud. I mean I listen really loud. I just listen louder than what, say, the 3S's would be able to just completely deal with all the time. You know, I would want the fun that the Special 40 brings into the mix. If I was to have them in my living room, I would have the 3S's, because they will play much more nicely in my living room and they'll sound a little more forward for me at lower volumes. Okay. Your late night listener, or your annoying neighbour's listener, or someone who likes that delicacy at, say, 50% or less, is going to love the 3S. It's a cracking speaker, it really is. It's great when you get it beyond there. It's just that 50% mark, the Special 40 takes over it. Alright, takes over it in performance stakes. I can almost see the graph making its way in front of me now. 2 different speakers for 2 different blokes. Both of them are badass speakers. Which one? Well, I mean, I've got both of them, so I don't really need to choose. Comments, questions and everything down below, you know. Don't be mean down there. It's not a nice place when people are mean down there, you know. For you TV watchers, I'll do my best to get all of the stuff that I reference down below to you. I just don't know how right now. If you want to speak to me or you want to drop me an email, then just fire away, all right? It takes me 48 to 72 hours to get around to emails because we get a lot of comms, but I will do it. My little red dot next to my inbox is my worst enemy, and I must defeat him every day, and I do. So I will get back to you. Links to the products as well. Remember, this is a shop. People do buy speakers here all the time. We do sell the speakers that we talk about. So there's never going to be a dull review of a product that we deal with, because it goes through a vetting procedure before we're confident to sell it. If it sounds like shit and you've seen it in here and it hasn't been reviewed, chances are it's gone back. Alright? I'm Carl, and this is Studio In Car with another Studio Hi-Fi video. If I don't speak to you before, have a brilliant Christmas. It's easily my favourite time of year. It's what gets me here on a Sunday to do a comparison video for you. Alright? Take it easy, guys.